Just to start by saying I feel a slight cheat after these two speakers because I haven't sort of lived my life for this project, unlike the first two people we heard from. And Louise Hutchinson, who's the director of S1 Artspace, who I'm sure some of you know, had a baby in March, and I'm doing maternity cover for her. And I've been involved in this project for a couple of years, but I certainly don't bear the scars of being involved with it for my entire adult life. So I'm sorry about that. But what I'm going to do as a result is just give you an overview of S1 Artspace, the sort of backstory, where we are now and what the plans are for the future. It has some sort of resonances with what we've heard already, some big differences, some similarities, and I'm sure they'll get drawn out, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. It was interesting you were looking at former disused council block, because that's kind of what we're doing as well at the moment, maybe on a slightly different scale. But S1 began in 1995, and it was an artist-led organisation. It was the first set of studios were in Milton Street, Sheffield, which was above a thrash metal nightclub, which did cause some noise issues, but I think there were more to do with them rather than us. And that site was active for about 15 years. There was a gallery and a studio space, and it's important to say at this point that I think from the outset it was designed or thought of as both a studio space with a public-facing gallery, and the public-facing programme had always been a key part of it. So it never just been a studio complex. And I think also interestingly, I was fascinated to hear the sort of organisational, non-organisational aspects of your work. It had always been set up as a company, as a charity. So it hadn't had that kind of evolution of organisationally of being a personal project and becoming a formal one. I think it got off on that footing from the outset. Over the years, partnerships grew. In 2010, there was a partnership entered into with Sheffield Hallam, which continues to this day, and the university's fine art graduates, the BA fine art graduates, so they have a sort of joint studio there where they share a studio space, and PhD students from Hallam also have a shared studio space at S1. So there was some institutional links built also with other organisations in the city. Then there was a move next door. So the old premises was sort of here. This was the new premises. They were bigger, much better gallery space, same landlord, unfortunately. Fortunately at the time, but became an unfortunate fact as time moved on. So this was the gallery space there, which I'm sure some of you know. However, the organisation was served notice to quit that space in 2016, and we had to be out in 6 months. And so that was a blow to S1, of course. It had put its heart and soul into this space. I think a lot of the artists had put a lot personally into it. I know the budget for doing the conversion was next to nothing, as I'm sure is often the case with these things, and people were up all night kind of putting this sort of stuff in, and it was galling to say the least, I think, for everyone. Having said that, it's also it's worth saying that with the public-facing gallery, it's always been a key part of that aspiration, or that aspect of the organisation's work, to have shows by the members. So there's the programme is a combination of shows which feature studio holders and shows that are curated with artists that aren't based here. And again, I think it was something that's said previously about the importance of having people coming and going in the programme to build international and national links that's beneficial for those who are members of the organisation. But as I say, they were given 6 months to leave in 2016. Annoyingly, the intention to redevelop was cited by the landlord in the kicking out process, but already they've started letting it out to private individuals to have shows and things in there, and have been letting it out as a venue. So obviously, perhaps they've got longer term ambitions, but it's slightly tragic to see it being used for a similar purpose to what we were doing, but by others on a more short-term basis. Having said that, I was interested to hear about your story with being encouraged to look at other things by the Arts Council and other funders. S1 had been looking at expanding its provision, but this building was never appropriate for that. And there had been a number of thoughts of looking at buildings around Sheffield, and some had gone as far as feasibility studies, but had tended to get knocked back for not being ambitious enough, which is sometimes troubling to hear, I think, because I mean, there's different levels of ambition are appropriate at different times, but that was some of the feedback the organisations had at the time. And so it already had its eyes on the next horizon, if you like, but this certainly threw a spanner in the works because it wasn't in the plan to move out of this first without a new home. Obviously the plan would be to try and sort the new home out and then transition. The horizon was being explored at the time that we were kicked out of Trafalgar House was around Park Hill, which is, as many of you know, I'm sure, is this incredible former council estate on the hill by Sheffield Station. It's 32 acres in size. There used to be 900 flats there. There was about 3,500 people lived there in its heyday. And it's a massive, I mean, it's as big as some small towns itself. It had shops, a school, everything. And this has been quite a public story, the bigger picture at Park Hill, but it was bought, it fell into disuse in the 90s, and it was bought by Urban Splash before the crash, and they had their plans were and are to regenerate it for residential use. They have already done what they call the first phase of Park Hill, which I'm just going to flip around a bit because this shows you the scale of the place. If you go to Sheffield Station, you see this bit, which is the bit that's been redone, but I mean that's only about a fifth of the whole place in total. They did this, and they've done this section, and it's all flats with some commercial use at ground floor and first floor level, and they had emerging plans to work out what to do with the rest of it, some residential, some student housing, some to be confirmed. And it became apparent that there was a conversation to be had about having some cultural use here, in whatever form that might look like. And could that be the answer to S1's longer term plans to find somewhere bigger that it could expand into to provide a great number of studio spaces and also to expand the gallery space to provide Sheffield with another contemporary art space. Obviously we've got Site and there's galleries in Museum Sheffield, but for a city its size it's not necessarily got the critical mass, say, that a place like Manchester has. Nevertheless, it's a big site and there were all sorts of opportunities, but in the first instance Urban Splash offered S1 a project space which was in a space that used to be this pub. There were 4 pubs on Park Hill. Apparently they were among the roughest pubs in England, and this one's, funny enough, named the Scottish Queen because Mary, Queen of Scots, was held in a castle in Sheffield for some time. But there was a project space which we're sort of still inhabiting at the moment that was which was thought of as a sort of pilot programme to see what a cultural presence on Park Hill might look like, because obviously it was always only ever a housing estate. It's not had this kind of thing before. And S1 programmed this space alongside Trafalgar House and had these both sites at the time that we were kicked out of Trafalgar House. So luckily we had this space as a sort of interim, and it became an interim space for the organisation, and it became transformed to the state it is now, which is it's no longer kind of a public gallery space, but we're essentially using it as studio space at the moment, and it's an interim space for the organisation's offices and the artists who were, along with us, thrown out of Trafalgar House. So we're using this quite small former pub space at Park Hill at the moment. And the conversation with Urban Splash developed into what could we do long term at Park Hill, and given that that might be quite a big conversation and a big project that might take some years to realise, what could be done in the medium term if we consider this to be the short term fix. And the medium term option that was arrived at, which we're working on at the moment, is to take the former garage building at Park Hill and turn it into studios and a gallery space that will be on a similar kind of scale to here, I guess. Very different building. But we'll have about 15 to 17 studios, depending on how it's configured, the gallery space, the university studio, and our offices. And that's been funded jointly by some bids to the people you can see on the screen, but including Urban Splash put some capital funding into it along with Arts Council. I think for Urban Splash, their priority is animating this wider site, and there's a number of strategies for doing that, and one of those is having a public space that's a cultural space, but also having artists present is a kind of key part of, for them, I think, is a key strand of what they do to that site to make it not just a housing estate. So we've arrived at this kind of mutually beneficial relationship with them at the moment, whereby we're developing ideas about how an arts organisation and artists can exist in a regenerated site, which of course was a massive social housing project from the 60s. Yeah, I was just going to tell you, this is the garage. The thing on top is their site office. It's a bunch of porter cabins. So it's quite, it's makeshift, and the plan is it's got a lifespan of 5 years, this project. It's not permanent, it's sort of semi-permanent. And this area of public realm as well has been identified as a sort of future sculpture project as well. So it's a space that can be used for programming. But the bigger picture is to think about this block here, and to think about building something here, which is a gallery, and converting quite a sizable number of what used to be flats into artist studios in this block and this block. And I've only got a couple of minutes, but I've only got a couple more slides, which is this one. At the moment, we got some money to start thinking about this in feasibility terms, and working with an architect to develop plans for a new gallery space. This is not a design, by the way, so we're only at REBA stage 2, so this isn't what it's going to look like. It's just a kind of idea at the moment. So don't come back in 6 years and show me this picture and complain about it. And in this block, sharing with Urban Splash to have studios at this level and at this level, and their residential on the upper levels. That's the current idea. This is still a fluid situation, so again, it's I'm sharing this with you as a sort of snapshot in a moment in time. But to work out the strategy for this and the plans for this before going for funding. We've been fortunate actually to be able to do it the other way around to what often happens with arts capital projects, which is you get kind of development money and then have to try and raise all the rest of the money as your plans are emerging. Whereas we've got this development opportunity where we can develop the plans and then take it to the funding market, and thinking about a model where obviously this gets developed by Urban Splash and we end up buying a proportion of it. So we're not kind of taking the development risk on the heritage building, which is, this is grade 2 listed, so it's not an easy building to do from a sort of development project point of view. Very early stages about how studios might look. It's quite a restrictive building because it's listed and it's got very low ceilings and everything's concrete. So it's quite expensive to mess around with. So a lot of it is found spaces and making found spaces artist spaces. But again, this is at very, very early stages at the moment. And we are opening the first exhibition in the gallery will open in July, which is going to be a survey of historic photographs of Park Hill residents taken, the first residents and the last residents. The ones in colour are the people who lived there just before it was shut down, if you like. And then after that, we've got a programme of shows from studio holders. But this is the sort of, the longer term vision. But it's worth saying we were talking earlier about how long these things take. I can think this is going to be 4, 5, 6 years in the making, probably.
So where's the space that the show in the summer is happening?
In the garage space. So that is this building, which is here.
That has been developed already.
Sorry?
That part of it's been developed already, or are you still working?
This part is the landscape's done. This building is this shot was probably taken before it's been developed, but it still looks like this. It's not. I mean, when you come, it's not. It's a sort of makeshift and interim space, really. But that's the site, and that building has been that building is original to the estate. It was where cars were parked, and in this area used to have a shopping centre on it, but now it's public realm. Well, probably not public realm, but for those of us who've read Anna Minton's book, but so that's our story so far. So any questions? Happy to take.